And it all felt complicated at the time, but like in hindsight, he was right? Like life does have a propensity to get a little bit more complicated as you go on. I still encourage people that have that call to entrepreneurship, no matter the life stage. But I'm glad I took the dive then. And you're right, it was admittedly scary at that time. I think I remember the first time I got like a $1,500 check from our first client, and I felt like it was like I was crazy. It just like felt so real to me, so scary. And then I was like, well, so like, who do I give the check to? Like, it's just like, it all gets real, like you're like, oh yeah, there's no departments for anything. Here we go.
Podcasting from Boulder, Colorado. This is the Baby Got Backstory podcast, where we dive into the story behind the story of today's most inspiring storytellers, creators, and entrepreneurs. I like big backstories, and I cannot lie. I am your host, Mark Gutman. I'm Mark Gutman, and on today's episode of Baby Got Backstory, we are talking with Beau Haralson, the co-founder and brand strategist at ScaleThat, and dedicated parent at the Haralson family. Before we get into the show, here's a not-so-gentle reminder. If you like and enjoyed the show, please take a minute or two to rate and review us over at Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Apple and Spotify use these ratings as part of the algorithm that determines ratings on their charts. Today's guest is Beau Haralson. Beau has over a decade of experience launching products and building brands, both big and small, including Google, Traffic and Conversion, Digital Marketer, Office Max, and many others. Over the years, he's worked with celebrities such as LeBron James and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and entrepreneurs that deserve to be celebrities, doubling over 15 businesses along the way. Beau is the creative force behind all campaigns that ScaleThat works with, and is regularly consulted surrounding his unique approach to marketing strategy, campaign architecture, and generating traffic and conversions predictably. But what is really fascinating about Beau is his decision to put family first and build a company and life that supports that. A little side note, if you would have asked 9-year-old Mark what name he wished his parents would have chosen for him, it would have been Beau. Inspired by Beau and Luke Duke fame, but I always wanted to be a Beau. Let's get back to today's Beau. Beau Haralson talks about working on the now famous Elf Yourself campaign with Office Max, what big brands really want, and how small brands can compete. And this is his story. I am here with Beau Haralson, the co-founder and CEO of ScaleThat. Beau, thanks for coming on, and let's get right to it. We're both digging out of snow and dealing with snow here in Colorado, so we're running a little late. But wanted to start off with a real simple thought and question of, what is ScaleThat? That's the name of your company. Tell me a little bit about ScaleThat.
Yeah. Number one, thanks for having me. I'm really honored to be here. And Mark, it's been great I felt comfortable wearing a hat today because I know you love a good hat. And so anyway, thanks for that. But the name ScaleThat ultimately came from, I've been doing agency work and helping grow brands for better part of a decade plus, and Fortune 500 brands and everything in between. And the number one thing I see folks get wrong is they just scale the wrong thing. And it's not because it's not like they woke up that day and said, let me just grow my business in the wrong way. We're all well-intentioned people. But one of the things I'm really passionate about is helping people find the right thing to scale. It's not a matter of if people want to scale. That's usually not the conversation. It's usually figuring out the right thing to grow and the right way to grow a business. And so getting a little bit cheeky with it, we're like, yeah, let's just call it ScaleThat. Because those are the moments we look for in conversations with folks and helping them grow their business. So we go, hey, that's the thing, ScaleThat. So taking a bit of that excitement and that's how we ended up with the name.
Very cool. And I think that we hear this word scale all the time, scale this, scale that. I want to scale, you want to scale, let's all scale, right? But I think that much like the genesis of your name, it has different definitions. I think it means different things to different people. What's it mean to you? Like, how do you define that?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think people definitely romanticize the concept of scale. I mean, I think it's definitely every entrepreneur's dream to find that predictable path to revenue is words that I hear tossed around. There's a great book of that title written by, his name escapes me. I think it was Aaron, I was going to say Rogers, but one of the early guys at Salesforce, and talked about this idea of predictable path to revenue. And everyone kind of caught on to that idea of like, okay, if marketing can get predictable, if sales can get predictable and we can scale, then like that's the golden ticket. And to some extent, marketing has gotten to be somewhat predictable. You can figure out your customer acquisition costs. You can figure out some of the customer journey, but there's part of this lightning in a bottle that's just elusive. And I think to answer your question, the idea of scale to me means finding that as close as you can, finding that algebra equation, if you will, of going, okay, if we do this and we do that, it'll cost us X and the output is Y. And if we do that consistently, then we'll grow and scale. The challenge is those inputs change, marketing changes, people change. We're kind of complicating ourselves. So it's an ever complex kind of system of variables. And then deep within that is the question of scale readiness. A lot of companies will get into it and they'll find that path to scale, and then they'll break. We've run a lot of folks out of inventory. We've broken some companies. And so I think like part of our questionnaire as we get to know companies is, are you ready to scale? And, there's assumptions within that. And often in fixing those things and taking a half step back, you'll find more efficient ways to scale. It just gets more exciting from there. But so I think as much as I love to talk about scale, what I love to talk about is growth readiness and close proximity to that as well, because that's the thing you can control. Some of those variables you can't, kind of at the top of the funnel, but the things you can control is like, if you were to say sell 500 units of whatever you're selling, or have to fulfill 5 more contracts this week, would it break you? Are you ready? Some of that type of stuff is stuff that's not as romanticized, but a lot of the good answers are found within those questions.
Such a great answer. Thank you. And as I think about that, I also can sense a twinge or a twang, if you will, in your voice that suggests that you're not necessarily, you weren't born and raised here in Colorado. And so as you were growing up, why don't you take us a little bit back to where you were raised, and were you like, did you think you'd ever be into this concept of scale and marketing and all this kind of stuff?
So I was born in Texas, particularly West Texas, which every once in a while, particularly if I'm talking about getting my oil changed, it comes right out. But most of my accent, I think, is somewhat neutralized, but totally depends on who I've been talking to. Particularly if I've talked to my mom that day, it comes right out. But
or if you're pulling people out of snowbank in a truck, right? Like then it gets accentualized as well.
That's right. But yeah, so I was born, and if you'd read like say my high school yearbook, it would have said like, "Hey, Beau, you're going to be a great youth pastor someday, or you're going to be like a park ranger someday." I've always been into the outdoors. I grew up in a home where my folks were missionaries growing up, and so by the nature of that, by the time I was 13, I'd been to I think like 6 different countries, all of them in very much third world environments. Traveled the majority of the U.S. Just grew up and really, I wouldn't say like first class traveling. Very much a lot of places with not a lot of water. Had a knife pulled on me, had a gun pulled on me, and those travels like had a lot of interesting, perspectives, I think, by the time I was like 13, 14. And I didn't realize how weird it was until I compared notes with some of my friends and was like, "What'd you guys do this summer?" And they're like, "We played baseball." And I'd be like, "Cool. I almost got shot." And, oh, that's different. Yeah. So I think on the other side of, of that, I think as scary as some of those experiences were, I'm really, really grateful for some perspective it gave me on just kind of, I feel like I got a small undergrad degree in anthropology by nature of just getting to travel and go to places where, there wasn't electricity, there wasn't running water. It just makes you grateful for every day, and grateful for that experience as well.
So pastor, youth pastor, or park ranger, you are neither right now. Like what happened? Like you're like, so if it was in the yearbook and you came out, you're like, I'm going to conquer the world as a youth pastor or a park ranger. What happened?
Oh man, no, it's a great question. I think along the way, I met a girl and I really, like there was some of that was really good for me. To be honest, there was some immaturity in me early on around this context of like providing and protecting and figuring that out, and then using some skills. I saw a good movie called Amazing Grace along the way, and there's a scene with William Wilberforce and that's pretty poignant for me. But he has an intervention from his friends, and they come together and they say, "Hey, we understand that you're really, really excited about like becoming a pastor in his scenario, and we understand that you're really, really also excited about becoming a politician, and in his context, actually." Changing the nature of the slave trade, really being one of the early forefathers of that. And his friends host an intervention. And they basically say, hey, we humbly suggest that you can do both. Like, just go do you. Like, go be you and pursue your interests. And you're going to like maybe touch some people along the way and help them out. And you're also going to, in his case, change public policy where he can impact people at a different level potentially than he could have maybe from behind a pulpit. And so regardless of worldview, the thing that's interesting to me about that is I think that we think that our career or our worldview has to be this binary thing that we put in a box somewhere. And I had literally, I had my friends almost intervene with me my junior year of school. And they're like, hey, dude, I don't know if you know this, but you're good at other things. Like you can actually help people out in the business world. You're halfway decent as a strategist. Like you can go do other things. And I said, well, worst case scenario, you go try those things for a little while and I'm not good at them. And I go back to what is quote more comfortable for me, what I grew up around and with. And it doesn't sound like a terrible way to go. And so my friends humbly suggested I do both. And I sat down and really reflected through that. And since then I've been, doing this thing called business and I've been recognized as being halfway decent at it along the way. So I haven't stopped yet. So we'll see. One day I'll just retire into being a park ranger though. That's still the goal.
So how'd your parents feel about not carrying on the line of work? And I imagine they probably had a lot of hopes and dreams for you as you were thinking about being a youth pastor or going into kind of a similar area as them.
I think overall, my dad is still a great mentor of mine. And I think overall, they're wildly supportive. I mean, I think that if I'd gone into nearly anything, they would have been pretty excited about it for me. So I never felt any undue pressure from them, to be honest. And they've been part of the journey. They geek out on it when I release a new commercial or I'm part of a new project. And so I'm really grateful for their support.
Cool. And so like, how did you get into marketing? That's still like for your friends to say, hey, like you're kind of good at this stuff, to get actually into marketing and start doing it. And, what was that like? How'd you even get involved in this space? You had a lot of choices at that point. If someone says to you, hey, you're good at business.
Yeah, no, it's broad. And I mean, I graduated a degree in communications and second, whatever it's called, a minor in business from Texas A&M. And I remember I was walking to a career fair. I mean, it was just like, I was like literally my last career fair, my senior year. And I'd already proposed to my girlfriend of then 3 years. We were in our 1 year engagement period. And, I was like, all right, I got to show up and make this thing happen. And I was knocking on doors and dialing and, trying to kick open whatever door I could. And I ran into someone at a career fair from Office Max. And I walked up and point blank said, hey, listen, I'm not a geek on office supplies, but I've seen some of y'all's commercials and some of the stuff y'all do, and it's interesting. And they wrote me in, and before I knew it, I was on a plane to Chicago and met a guy named Bob Thacker. And Bob was the guy that brought Michael Graves into Target. And Michael Graves was one of the earlier designers. There used to be this store called Kmart. And there was kind of like these big three. There's Kmart, Walmart, and Target were kind of all duking it out. And Bob Thacker brought designers into Target and brought design to the masses, ultimately through Target. And I said, I don't really candidly care about office supplies, but I want to learn from a guy like that. And so at the time we wanted to move to Colorado and had opportunities out here, and I punted on all of them. And I said, hey, we're going to go do this whole thing in Chicago. and give it a go. And so I went and worked at Office Max corporate headquarters, actually on the business side of things. And then I reported and was kind of a liaison from the business side to the marketing side. So it was representing the voice of the business to the marketers and saying, hey, go and grow this accordingly. And I'd say where like marketing kind of hit me hook, line, and sinker was I got to be a part of the Elf Yourself campaign. So I don't know if you remember this campaign, but you got to you pasted your face on a dancing elf when Flash animations were a thing, and you share it with friends. So Bob originated that campaign along with his team, and I got to be a part of that. And I was like, okay, this is it. This is the fun side of things. And then that was it for me for marketing.
And then where did that job lead you to? So you eventually, you got interested in marketing, and, you're learning from one of the best. At what point do you come to Colorado?
Yeah. So I did that for 3 or 4 years. And honestly, it was in the mid to late, 2008. So you can do the math. Not a great year to be selling much of anything, much less discretionary office supplies and things like that. And so things did compress a bit in the market. And so that was like my first run through a recession, which was really healthy for me from a professional standpoint to navigate that. We got creative and innovative. I ended up being a part of the business unit that sold store within a store solutions. If you imagine at one point in time, Best Buy didn't have a designated Apple section or a designated Samsung section. That was all like a new concept. And what we would do is take that similar concept and take it into, say, a Kroger or a Safeway and say, hey, you guys are selling office supplies. Can we just take over that run for you and do that? And so was wrapping up that, was helping sell that solution in, and got used to kind of selling and enjoyed that part of it, and negotiating big deals and be a part of that whole thing and just innovative business modeling. And we were able to save a few jobs. And I was like, that was cool. We were able to actually put some bread on the table for the company, get some incremental funds in a really challenging time. And around about then, Office Depot went to announce they were actually going to buy out Office Max. And even if my number would have been called, I would have been moving to Boca Raton, Florida. And nothing against Boca Raton. I was like, yeah, I think this is our chapter change. And so I've been building a network out here in Colorado for 7 years. At that point in time, I'd flown out here and I'd ski a day, I'd bike a day, and then I'd go shake hands and have coffee with people out here for 7 years straight, regardless of the year. I always just did, that was how I did spring break. And so called up some folks in the network out here and went to work for an agency out here for a little while until I got the bug for entrepreneurship.
Yeah. What was that agency out here?
So they're actually up in Longmont. It's named Avocet. So it's like a company that I'd interned for, and so I knew them a bit and really enjoyed that part of it. Digital was happening at the same time, and a good buddy of mine named Mike Worley was, and I had kind of geeked out through mutual mentors, kind of guys that were under the tutelage of Seth Godin, and we'd meet up once a month and just kind of riff on digital marketing and what was happening. And believe it or not, pay-per-click and Google and all that stuff was still just then happening. And we were like, hey, this thing's happening at a fast pace. And he was like, hey, you want to take the dive? Let's just go start something on our own. And so we started an agency, ran that for 3 or 4 years. Yep. And then that was my first foray into entrepreneurship quickly-ish after moving to Colorado.
Yeah. And so I think as we remember things, it's like Mike's like, hey, and let's start a business. And you're like, yeah, sure. But why did you really want to start your own business? Why do that? I mean, it's not easy. Yeah. You mentioned I'm assuming you have a wife at this point. I don't know of your family situation, but you got some responsibilities. So it's not like nothing's happening. Why start your own business? Why go into business for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, coming from an organization of 35,000 folks, where there was an HR department and, some cogs to the wheel all moving with or without me showing up. It was an interesting thing to make that transition. And I had, life felt complicated to me at that time, but I had a good friend and another mentor, guy named Aaron McHugh, that dropped this little nugget on me. And he said, hey, to be honest, Beau, life isn't going to get any more simple than it is right now. I know you have a wife and obligations and all this type of stuff, but pretty soon you might have a dog, a baby, grow a family, bigger mortgage, like all the stuff. He's like, if there's a time to be risk tolerant and make a jump, and if you feel like you have like a burning, sensation in your heart to like go do something and put your stamp on it, like I got news for you. It's probably maybe in this decade, maybe even in this like 2 or 3 year gap while things are quote simple. And it all felt complicated at the time, but like in hindsight, he was right? Like life does have a propensity to get a little bit more complicated as you go on. I still encourage people that have that call to entrepreneurship, no matter the life stage. But I'm glad I took the dive then. And you're right, it was admittedly scary at that time. I think I remember the first time I got like a $1,500 check from our first client, and I felt like it was like I was crazy. It just like felt so real to me, so scary. And then I was like, well, so like, who do I give the check to? Just like it all gets real, like you're like, oh yeah, there's no departments for anything. Here we go.
Got to do it all. I'm the everything person. Yeah. And those words from Aaron McHugh, wow, resonate so much with me. It's just like, you just don't realize that even when you think how complicated your life is, it just never seems to get less complicated. It just kind of keeps getting more and more complicated. So great advice and great insight, great mentorship. That's really cool. So that business, is that when I met you and Mike the first time? Like when you were in that business?
That is, yeah. Up at Cloud Camp, we had, I'd been friends with Pete Vargas for a long time, and we met up at one of Pete's events. But yeah, I think that was year 2, year 3-ish for us in decline. But yeah, that's when we crossed paths.
Yeah. And it was my impression at that time that business was really strongly weighted towards digital marketing, funnel building, working with other partners like digital marketer. Can you tell us a little bit about that business? And do I have that right? I want to make sure I'm retelling that a little right.
Yeah, you're 100% right. So I would say we were heavily influenced by HubSpot and some of their methodologies in terms of like there's a big content marketing push at that time, which is great and still is a valid marketing strategy. But we paired that with paid media, and that was kind of like the perfect Venn diagram of going, okay, that's great that you can create content, but how do you amplify it? And then what's the creative behind it? And so that was, I think, what that linchpin between. I had a house rule, which is if you're going to spend, $1,000 creating content, then you probably should, at least from a 1-to-1 ratio, spend $1,000 sending that content out, right? Proliferate, like actually like sharing that content through paid ads, through whatever. And it's not a perfect rule, but it ended up being a good rule because a lot of folks that were just in the content marketing game at that point in time didn't fully understand the power of paid ads and advertising and amplifying that content. And so I think we quickly moved up in the rank amongst our peers in terms of like understanding and how to create and amplify a funnel. Also under the tutelage of, you mentioned digital marketer, under the tutelage of Ryan Dice and Richard Lindner and the crew there. So we kind of met up with them midstream throughout that and drank a ton of the digital marketer Kool-Aid. And I'm glad I did. It's been impactful for me in my career. Went on to have an opportunity to support them from the paid ad side of things and actually run their ads for them in a later chapter and really form a long-term relationship with those guys.
Yeah. And so, we'll fast forward a little bit. I know that you had tremendous success at this company, which was called Climb, CLYMB, right? Is that the way it's spelled?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I just really had the Y, so it threw me off. Right. And your partner, you and Mike, I think Mike, went off to do something else. You guys separated, but on good terms. And he went off to do something else, and you continued to grow the business. And then you sell the business. What happened there?
Yeah, it was interesting. So at the end of year 4, we had an opportunity unsolicited. Actually, we had 3 opportunities coming on the business at the same time, and of just people saying, "Hey, we love what you guys are doing. We want to buy it. We want to acquire it. We want to partner, whatever." And we weren't hunting or shopping for any of this at the time. I'd read a book by John Warlow called Built to Sell early on, which I highly recommended if you're creating anything and need to, like, if you're a creative a bit like me, it'll drag you into systems thinking, which is great. And so I'd read that book, but kind of had like tucked it away, and all of a sudden had to pull that book back out and go, what do we do? And so Mike and I looked at each other. We had one of the opportunities was from a company down in Texas, and I love Texas, born in Texas, but I just wasn't in a hurry to make a transition back there. I'd worked pretty hard to get here in the state of Colorado and raise a family out here, and so that was the small, minute detail that kind of introduced this idea of like, okay, well, like we graduated our college in entrepreneurship. We've been doing this for 4 years. Like, cool, it's our senior year, Mike and I had that conversation, and like you said, parted amicably, and he ended up to go work with that company down in Texas for a little while, and that was great. And I took over complete ownership of Climb and ran it for a good another 6 to 9 months, something to that effect. And one of those other suitors, if you will, continued to pursue me in that gap of time, and that was a local creative agency out here in Boulder called Human. And Human ultimately acquired Climb, I think 6 to 9 months past that 4-year mark where Mike and I separated. And it was, again, like I think I'd had a dress rehearsal of like what the whole acquisition could look like, and got a taste of what the main act could look like, and really could see acceleration through acquisition as part of my journey at the time. And I'm really glad that I stepped through that door. And got through those conversations and had an exit. And I think it's not as common in the service industry, but I could write at least 2 or 3 chapters of a book on like what I learned going through it. And I'm really glad I did, and was able to, go through that process and provide for my family and get some level of, like an exclamation point on, 4 years of 60 and 80 and sometimes 100-hour weeks of just kind of pushing and working hard.
This episode brought to you by Wild Story. Wait, isn't that your company? It is. And without the generous support of Wild Story, this show would not be possible. A brand isn't a logo or a tagline or even your product. A brand is a person's gut feeling about a product, service, or company. It's what people say about you when you're not in the room. Wild Story helps progressive founders and savvy marketers build purpose-driven brands that connect their business goals with the customers they want to serve, so that both the business and the customer needs are met. This results in crazy, happy, loyal customers that purchase again and again, and this is great for business. If that sounds like something you and your team might want to learn more about, reach out at www.wildstory.com, and we'd be happy to tell you more. Now back to our show. Yeah, you said you learned a ton. If you could share one thing that you learned out of that experience, what would it be? Or what do you share most often with people?
Yeah. There's the really tactical stuff of like legal setups and all those types of things, which I think you can Google and find out, and happy to do that. But more on like a philosophical level, I think the way I learned this lesson was by nature of the birth of our first kiddo. So Eli was born about 2 years into a 4-year stint, if you will, as an entrepreneur. And he was born 2 months early. And so we spent 6 weeks in the hospital with him. And it was a really intense 6 weeks, right? Like, I could answer emails sometime at 10 o'clock at night. And it was, we literally lived in the hospital with him. And it was really, really humbling, because I came out of that experience and thought, man, I built this business for it to survive with me being in the room 60% of the time. And I can't be in the room 60% of the time. Like, even if I want to, like, there's life circumstances that come up. And so I sat down and I wrote out all the things that I did on a week-to-week basis. And I literally just was like, okay, what of that can I delegate, operationalize, put a process around? And what of that's like the top 20% that like absolutely requires the me being in the room moment. And I cut out about 40% of what I did, and I operationalized it as best I could with Mike coming out of the hospital. And if I hadn't have done that, I don't think we would have ever exited, to be honest, because like it just would have been a talent acquisition and not like a company acquisition. And by nature, building those processes And they weren't perfect to begin with, but they got better and better, and we got better and better. We actually had something that was acquirable that people were interested in. And I think I had to lower some pride, right? I like to be the Don Draper. I like to come in with creative ideas. I like to be that guy. And I think I have a knack for it. But if that's the 20%, then like, what's the other 80% that is necessary, but not, maybe a necessary evil is, to that, and actually takes away from those creative moments or takes away from those impactful moments. And how can we, so anyway, I could wax and wane on about that for a long time, but I think I'd encourage you wherever you're at, no matter the business stage. I read a book called Essentialism. Oh man, Greg McEwen. There it is. If you read the first chapter, it's great, but it just talks about the idea of writing yourself out of a job and doing only the stuff that you're the best at, and delegating the rest as best you can. So even if you're ever going to exit or not, it's good practice. It's a good thing to get used to, and a good audit. And I'm glad that by nature of circumstance, I had to go through that audit the hard way. So do it the easy way. Don't end up in the hospital.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing all that. And I want to make sure we get to probably one of the more pivotal moments of your life and your career. And so you've exited, you've been acquired by a human, at least from the outside. And I followed it. I was watching, I was like, how awesome is that? Right. Like you then like get elevated into some pretty sweet clients and opportunities, some big name clients that I'll let you talk about if you want. But I'm looking at it like, how cool is a strategist and a brand builder and a marketer? What an amazing opportunity. You exited into a really cool, hip Colorado ad agency and brand building agency. But then, life didn't get any less complicated for you, did it?
Sure. No, and I think like success is iterative. I think that people think that success is this like, man, if I could just like buy a Lamborghini one day, that would be like the marker of success for some people. And that's great, man. If that motivates you, fast cars are cool. I get it. Like, go for it. But I think like your definition of success can change every 6 months if it needs to. So, I'll start with kind of that. So I ended up at Human for, I think, 2 years. And I think week 1, I found myself like on a plane up to like Nike headquarters and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, okay, here we go. And I'd work with some like Fortune 1000 brands, call it, but not like Fortune 50 or not like Fortune 100. And I was like, oh, okay, all right, here we go. And so I bought a new pair of shoes, which was a good idea. And, all of a sudden but what was ironic about the whole thing is that the conversations weren't that dissimilar of early stage startups. And I'll leave you with, I'll leave one concept, one footnote of this whole experience is that the secret of what I think of working with big brands is that small brands want to be big and big brands actually want to be small. And so like, there's this interesting, like kind of triangulation between these two things I saw and getting to work with small and big. And actually, I think that's pretty cool. But if you're a small brand listening, and if maybe you're a challenger brand, or you're just kind of like in that early stage of creating that momentum, your greatest advantage is the fact that you're small. It's that you're nimble, that you can create these amazing relationships with your customers early on. And that's going to be what creates raving fans. And the secret that the big guys don't tell you is that they actually are kind of like, jealous might be the wrong word, but they study you. And that's why you have these acquisitions of like Hormel and Justin's Nut Butter, or watch Dollar Shave Club and what they've done over the last 5 to 10 years. They were a challenger brand not too long ago. Harry's, while we're talking about shaving, has taken over like 4 feet of space in Target. They started as a D2C brand. But, I think small is the new big, big is the new small, have fun with that one. But like, I think that was the thing I learned, is that I could take these small brand strategies, help them apply them to the bigger brands, and get them super excited about that. And here's the one thing that was ultra excited about that is that we could take some of those bigger brand budgets and apply those smaller challenger strategies to them and create a bit of jet fuel behind that success. So short story long, had the opportunity to work with, World Expo in Dubai, had the opportunity to inform a bit of the strategy behind the brand launch with LeBron James, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Lindsey Vonn, and Cindy Crawford, and found myself in this really like interesting brand strategy role along with marketing in those hallways. And that was great. Here's the deal. I was in those hallways for a long time. And that's not a knock against the brand specifically, this agency specifically. I have good friends across the agency environment, and the hours are not normal hours. And a lot of that's just because a lot of folks at agencies care. They care about those brands. They're gonna put in the hours to make sure that they show up. It is a competitive environment. There's about 15,000 small to mid-sized agencies in the U.S. There's probably about 100 to 200 Omnicom level, broader, bigger agencies, and every one of them that I've had the opportunity to interact with, in the trenches, are all working dang hard, and I've got an amazing amount of respect for that. But to tee out the second part of that conversation, which was the transition of like my version of success, my professional journey has been marked by my kids in a good way. But we got news at the 20-week appointment for our second kiddo that she was going to be born with spina bifida. And there's a lot of different types of spina bifida. Hers was on the spectrum of good to bad, or like menial to like not great. Hers is more on the not great side of things. So doctors looked at us in the eye and said, hey, there's 80% chance she's going to be born with some level of cognitive issues and or hydrocephalus. She likely won't walk. And, it's going to be a tough journey. And they asked us, they're like, do you want to go on this journey? And I was like, are you asking what I think you're asking? Like, yeah. And we're in. We're like, without hesitation, my wife and I, like, we definitely cried at the diagnosis. We had our moment and worked through that, and still are working through that. But we're in, right? And I'm kind of all in or all out type of guy. And so let's see here, it's like 15 to 16 weeks later, she was a little bit early. We're on the roller coaster. Wife goes in labor. We had just been in for an ultrasound that day. So I saw Emmy in the womb the day she was born. And I actually asked the doctor, I was like, hey, real talk, if Jenna goes into labor tonight, what do I do? Like, we're in an at-risk category. We live 45 minutes from Children's, which is where the baby, like, where she needs to be born with all the help and support of all that. Or we're like 20 or 30 minutes away from you. And she was like, if you can push it the extra 15 minutes, you'll avoid being on a helicopter, and your daughter will avoid being on a helicopter, like, and being separated from mom. And I was like, yeah, well, like, that sounds great. So literally that night, Jenna went into labor. It's like 20 degrees out. If you live here in Colorado, you appreciate this, but there's E470 and it's a toll road, thankfully. And so I pushed it 115, 120 miles per hour on that thing and made that drive in like 25, 30 minutes. And Jenna was, I won't get into specifics, but it was time. That Emmy was nearly born in the car. So Emmy was born, had surgery on her spine within 24 hours, and then hung out in the hospital for another 9 days. And my life changed forever in the best of ways. And with that, my career needed to change a bit too. But I knew that at that moment, from a priority standpoint, in order, I wanted to be a great husband. I wanted to be a great dad. And if I had to be a good businessman, that was okay. I'd rather not be a great businessman and a good husband and a good dad, or maybe potentially bad dad, because I'd run out of hours. And so I reprioritized completely. And I don't regret a single bit of that. But I was working 80 hours a week at the time. And I just literally just started working 35 hours a week and hitting my numbers and doing my things. And it became apparent that, I needed to be in the trenches. We all needed to be working on those late night pitches together, et cetera. And I wasn't going to be that guy anymore. And so I just gracefully exited stage left. And that was kind of our departure. And I don't regret a bit of that, because I think a lot of people would say, hey, like, pursue the thing, hustle. Like, I love Gary Vee. I've had the opportunity to meet him and talk to him about work-life balance. And he actually is an inspiration for me in the context of, I've asked him point blank, I said, hey, what would slow you down? And he said, if I had a medical need, or if there was something going on with my family that required me to be home. I said, Thank you. Thank you. I didn't need his validation, but hustle culture can, I think, get turned up too high. And so I turned my volume down, and that's been a good transition for me on the back end of that. So I was a bit long-winded, but that's been my journey. We can kind of end on the current chapter if you like, but any questions on that part of the journey?
Yeah, no, I'd love to get into it way deeper. We are running tight on time. I know that you have to run along here. And so what I'd love for you to do is just let us know, what's next for Beau and ScaleThat. Like, what are you looking forward to? What are you most excited about right now?
Yeah. So joined forces with a good long-term friend of mine named Alex Herndon about 2 years ago now. And we played to our strengths, right? So he's really good at paid media. I'm pretty good at creative. I've had the opportunity to shoot national commercials and Facebook ads and all the things. And we said, hey, what would success in this chapter look like? He'd exited the agency prior as well. And so we kind of, met up, classic thing, got out of the napkin, and we said, hey, let's just take on a half dozen clients a year that have our cell phone number, and let's take really good care of them and say no to anything above that. And so we've got 5 or 6 private clients, private in the context that I can't share with you. I can share with you like 1 or 2 of their names, but I'm under NDA where I can't for the others. And we spend, $3 to $5 million plus on advertising a month for those guys and take really good care of them. And when they have creative needs and when they have other stuff that's coming up and business strategy stuff, we advise on those and take good care of folks as best we can. And so that's been a privilege to step into that. It's right sized. I get to be a dad. I get to be at therapy appointments. I get to be, I've got taking our oldest to gym here in a minute. And that's, that for me is my definition of success. Ferrari or no Ferrari, I'm plenty happy with that. And we're moving the needle for folks and taking good care of our clients. And it's just been great. So I think there was like a how can we help kind of nature of that, or what's within that. So the business model is pretty simple. Take care of a half dozen folks. We're moving into consulting with whatever extra hours we have. So we're taking a group of clients that quite honestly wouldn't be initial great fits for our direct service model. And we're going to do some ongoing coaching for folks that just need high level support, but have people in-house to help execute. So we'll be unveiling that in the next probably 30 or 45 days. And then we built out some software in the background that helps people buy ads more effectively and efficiently, and took parts of Alex's brain and a bit of mine and had that all coded up. And so we'll be selling that software. Again, it's just about replicating what you can. And then we're kind of in a mindset that if we don't share some of the success that we've been able to create for clients, it's actually, and I mean this with no ego, but I had a good friend that was like, hey, it's kind of selfish not to share. You should start sharing how you help people, and that will help other people help other people. And I was like, great. Yeah, you're right. You win. So we're kind of pivoting to like actually starting to share some of these stories that have, typically been hidden in conference rooms and boardrooms of, Fortune 100 companies. And I'm excited to start sharing that a bit more and sharing how to make that impact.
Great. Well, make sure you let us know how we can help you share that, where our listeners can find access to that or get more information or enroll in that, in the ability to receive those stories. And Beau, as we come to a close here, I'd like you to think back to that boy in high school who's weighing the idea of being a youth pastor or a park ranger. And what do you think he'd say if he saw you today?
He'd probably tell me to rest a bit more. But I think he'd also say like, everything in its season is probably a good way to summarize that, is like, hey, like that's great, young Beau, that you have these like your heart is excited about these things, be it cause oriented, be it like playing outside. But like, I think I've come to this conclusion that like everything has its own little season. Like, it dumped on us this weekend and people were like, did you go skiing? And I'm like, no, man, I was hanging out with my 2-year-old. Like, that's fine. And I was happy to be. So I think a lot of people want success now and they define it in a certain way, but I think you can do both. And I think you can be patient and have your definition of success in its own season. And I think to be patient in that and to be discerning in that and to readjust and calibrate for that is probably what I would say to the young buck sitting there with his yearbook open. It was just like, hey, be patient, man. And pursue things fully, but like be patient and don't pursue it all at once.
And that is Beau Haralson, co-founder of ScaleThat. I've been following Beau's career over the years, and in typical Beau fashion, he was very humble and understated about all the brands he's worked with and his successes in the marketing space. Maybe we can get him back on the show for a round 2 brag session. There were so many nuggets in this one, but 2 that stood out to me. Everyone finds their success in their own season. That is so true. And I think that if we just let that hang and resonate for a moment, you'll feel how impactful that insight is. And the other big standout idea was that big brands really want to be like small brands. And small brands have all the opportunity as they are adaptable and nimble. You hear that, small brands? Go out there and kick some big brand butt. A big thank you to Beau Haralson and the ScaleThat team. I love your order of priorities, and it is inspiring to hear how our business lives can be prioritized if we only ask, can I delegate this? We will link to all things Beau Haralson and ScaleThat in the show notes. And if you know of a guest who should appear on our show, please drop me a line at podcast@wildstory.com. Our best guests, like Beau, come from referrals from past guests and our listeners. Well, that's the show. Until next time. Make sure to visit our website, www.wildstory.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS, so you'll never miss an episode. I like big stories and I cannot lie. You other storytellers can't deny.